The line outside the concert hall stretched all the way around the corner of the building. Young people stood in groups, talking excitedly about their chances. They held expensive instrument cases and folders full of certificates. Most of them had spent years at the best music schools. They wore nice clothes and had parents waiting in fancy cars nearby. At the very back of this long line stood a woman who looked very different from everyone else. Her name was. She was 43 years old, and she held an old violin case that had many scratches and worn edges. Her clothes were simple and clean, but clearly not expensive. Her hands showed signs of hard work, with rough skin and short nails. Watched the young people ahead of her. Some of them turned around to look at her with confusion in their eyes. A few whispered to each other. She knew what they were thinking. What was an older woman like her doing at an audition for young classical musicians? The truth was something none of them could have guessed. Worked as a cleaning lady at this very concert hall. For the past 12 years, she had mopped these floors, cleaned these seats, and emptied trash cans after every show. Every night, while everyone else went home, she stayed behind in the empty building. Sometimes she would sit alone in the dark auditorium and remember a different life. Today was her day off, but instead of resting at home, she had woken up before sunrise. She had taken her grandmother's violin out of the closet where it had been sitting for many years. She had cleaned it carefully, tuned the strings, and made a decision that scared her very much. She was going to audition. The competition was a big deal in the music world. Every year, hundreds of talented musicians tried to win. The winner would get a chance to perform with the city's famous orchestra. They would also receive money for their studies, and doors would open everywhere for their career. Had seen the poster for this audition while she was cleaning last week. She had stopped her mop and stared at it for a long time. Something inside her chest had started to hurt. It was a familiar pain, one she had pushed down for more than 20 years. The line moved slowly forward. Hours passed. Feet began to ache from standing. She had no chair, no assistant, no one to bring her water. The young musicians around her had all of these things. Some of them even had coaches giving them last-minute advice. A young girl in front of turned around. She had hair and wore a beautiful blue dress. Her violin case looked brand new and very expensive. "Excuse me," the girl said. Her voice was polite, but her eyes were curious. "Are you here for the audition, or are you waiting for someone?" Gave a small smile. "I am here to audition." The girl's eyebrows went up in surprise. She did not know what to say. After an awkward moment, she turned back around and whispered something to her friend. Both girls giggled quietly. Did not feel angry. She understood. She knew how she must look to them. An old woman with a beat-up violin case standing among musical prodigies. It did seem strange. But they did not know her story. Finally, after 5 hours of waiting, reached the front doors of the concert hall. A young man with a clipboard checked names and handed out numbers. When gave her name, he frowned and looked at his list twice. "I don't see any music school listed here. No teacher references, no competition history." He looked up at her. "Ma'am, are you sure you registered correctly?" "Yes," said quietly. "I registered online. I paid the fee." The young man sighed. He seemed annoyed. "Fine. Take number 127. Wait in the holding room until they call you." Took the small paper with her number and walked inside. The holding room was large and full of nervous musicians. They were warming up, practicing difficult passages, stretching their fingers. The sound of dozens of instruments playing at once filled the air. Found a quiet corner and sat down on a folding chair. She did not take out her violin. She did not practice. She simply sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes closed. Around her, people noticed. More whispers, more strange looks. A young man with dark hair and an expensive suit walked over to her. He was holding a cello case that probably cost more than made in a year. "First time at something like this?" he asked. His tone was friendly, but there was something else underneath. maybe pity, maybe amusement. You could say that, replied. What school did you attend? I did not go to school here. Oh, so you studied abroad, Europe, Vienna, Moscow. Thought about this question, it was complicated to answer. I learned in Cuba, she finally said, a long time ago. The young man nodded slowly. He did not seem to know what to make of this answer. Well, good luck, he said and walked away. The hours continued to pass. One by one, musicians were called into the auditorium to perform. Some came back looking happy. Others came back with tears in their eyes. The judges were known for being very tough. They had seen everything. They were not easily impressed. Watched each person go and return. She listened to the sounds coming from behind the big doors. Beautiful music, talented players, each one better than the last. A small voice inside her began to whisper doubts. What are you doing here? These people have been training their whole lives. You have been cleaning toilets. You are going to embarrass yourself. You should leave now before it is too late. But stayed in her seat. She had spent too many years listening to that voice. Today, she had decided not to listen anymore. At 7 o'clock in the evening, a woman with a headset came into the holding room. Number 127, she called out. You are next. Stood up slowly. Her knees felt weak. Her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her throat. She picked up her grandmother's violin case and walked toward the door. The young people who were still waiting watched her go. Some of them smirked. Some of them looked confused. One girl actually laughed and quickly covered her mouth. Did not look back. She walked through the big doors and into the auditorium. The stage was bright with lights. The seats were empty except for one long table near the front. 5 judges sat there with serious faces and pens in their hands. Papers and score sheets were spread out before them. Recognized one of them immediately. Professor. He was one of the most famous conductors in the world. She had seen him many times, though he had never seen her. She had cleaned his dressing room after his performances. She had swept up the flower petals that fans threw on stage for him. Now he sat just 30 feet away from her, and he was going to judge her. Professor did not look up when walked onto the stage. He was writing something on his papers. The other judges also seemed uninterested. One of them was checking her phone. Another was yawning. Stood at the center of the stage and waited. The lights were hot on her face. The silence was heavy. This was the moment she had been dreaming about and dreading for more than 20 years. Finally, Professor spoke without raising his head. His voice was bored and tired. He had seen 126 musicians today. He was ready to go home. Name and what you will be playing for us. Opened her mouth to answer. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. My name is. For just a moment, Professor's pen stopped moving. Something about the name seemed familiar, but then he shook his head slightly and continued writing. Very well, Ms., he said. Please play a simple scale for us, then a basic folk melody, something easy. We will let you know if we need to hear more. It was the request they gave to people they had already decided to reject. Understood this immediately. She had watched enough auditions over the years. She had cleaned up after them. She knew exactly what this meant. They wanted to get rid of her quickly, but did not move toward the exit. She did not apologize and leave. Instead, she slowly opened her grandmother's old violin case, and what happened next would change everything. Hands were shaking as she opened the violin case. The old leather creaked softly. Inside, resting on faded red velvet, was an instrument that told a story of its own. The violin was beautiful. Even from 30 feet away, one of the judges noticed and leaned forward in her seat. The wood had a deep, golden color that came from age and careful love. The curves were perfect. The strings caught the stage lights and seemed to glow. This was not a cheap violin. This was something special. Professor finally looked up from his papers. His eyes went to the instrument in his hands, and for a moment his bored expression changed. He adjusted his glasses and looked more carefully. "That is an interesting instrument," he said slowly. "Where did you get it?" Lifted the violin gently. "It belonged to my grandmother. She brought it with her from Spain many years ago. It was made in Italy in 1847. A murmur went through the judges. They exchanged glances. A violin from that time period, if it was real, could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. What was a woman like this doing with such a treasure? The judge, who had been checking her phone, put the device down. She was paying attention now. "Please," Professor said, waving his hand. "The scale, whenever you are ready." Brought the violin up to her chin. She positioned the bow over the strings. Her hands were still trembling. She could feel sweat on her forehead. The lights were so bright. The auditorium was so big. The judges were waiting. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. This was the moment. This was where she had to make a choice. She could play what they asked for, a simple scale, a basic melody. She could be polite and obedient. She could accept that they had already decided she was not worth their time. Or she could do something else. For 22 years had been invisible. She had worked in silence. She had cleaned up after other people's success. She had watched talented musicians come and go while she pushed a mop across the floor. She had listened to rehearsals through walls and closed doors. She had hummed along to symphonies while emptying trash cans in empty hallways. For 22 years, she had hidden who she really was. Tonight she decided that would end. Did not play a scale. She did not play a simple folk melody. Instead, she played the first notes of something that made Professor drop his pen. It was Caprice number 24. To anyone who does not know classical music, this might not mean much, but to the judges sitting in that auditorium, it meant everything. Caprice number 24 is one of the hardest pieces ever written for violin. It requires incredible speed, perfect control, and years of practice. Most professional violinists struggle with it. Many never master it at all. And this cleaning lady was playing it from memory. The first notes flew from his violin like birds released from a cage. They were fast and precise and absolutely flawless. Her fingers moved across the strings with a speed that seemed impossible for someone her age. Her bow danced up and down, creating sounds that filled the entire auditorium. Professor sat frozen in his seat. His mouth had fallen open slightly. The pen lay forgotten on the table. Beside him, the other judges were equally stunned. They had expected to hear a beginner. They had expected to politely clap and send this old woman on her way. They had not expected this. Kept her eyes closed as she played. She was not in the auditorium anymore. She was somewhere else entirely. She was back in Havana, in the small practice room of the National Conservatory. She was 12 years old again, playing for her grandmother while the old woman smiled and nodded. She was 17, standing on a stage in Vienna after winning first place in an international competition. She was young and full of dreams, and the whole world was waiting for her. The music poured out of her like water from a broken dam. Years of silence, years of hiding, years of pushing down her true self. All of it came out through her fingers and her bow and the beautiful old violin that her grandmother had given her. In the wings of the stage, word was spreading. Other staff members had heard the music and come to investigate. A security guard stood with his mouth open. A stagehand had dropped a coil of rope and forgotten to pick it up. Even some of the competing musicians had crept out of the holding room to see what was happening. The young man with the expensive cello, the one who had spoken to earlier, stood at the edge of the stage door. His face had gone pale. He was supposed to be next. He was supposed to impress the judges with his skill. Now he was watching an old woman in simple clothes play better than anyone he had ever heard. Moved into the middle section of the piece. This was where most violinists struggled. The notes came faster and faster, climbing higher and higher. The technical demands were brutal. One small mistake would ruin everything. But made no mistakes. Her bow flew across the strings. Her fingers pressed down on exactly the right spots at exactly the right moments. The music twisted and turned like a river rushing through mountains. It was wild and beautiful and completely under her control. Professor slowly removed his glasses and set them on the table. He was no longer watching as a judge. He was watching as a music lover, as someone who had dedicated his life to finding true talent, as someone who knew he was witnessing something rare and precious. The judge who had been yawning earlier was now leaning so far forward that she was almost falling out of her chair. Her eyes were wet. She did not know why she wanted to cry, but she could feel tears building up behind her eyes. Music can do that to people. The right music, played the right way, can reach inside and touch something deep. It can make you remember things you thought you had forgotten. It can make you feel things you did not know you could feel. Music was doing exactly that. In the holding room, the remaining competitors had stopped practicing. They gathered near the door, straining to hear. Some of them felt jealous. Some of them felt inspired. All of them understood that they were hearing something special. The girl in the blue dress, the one who had laughed at, was now crying openly. She did not fully understand why. Maybe it was because she had been wrong about the old woman. Maybe it was because the music was so beautiful. Maybe it was because she suddenly realized that talent could be found in places she never expected. Was approaching the final section of the piece, the hardest part, the part where the music demands everything from the player, where technique and emotion must come together perfectly. Her bow moved faster, her fingers blurred across the strings. The notes climbed higher and higher, each one more difficult than the last. The pressure was enormous. One slip, one tiny mistake, one moment of weakness. But had waited 22 years for this moment. She was not going to fail. Professor leaned forward. His eyes were locked on the woman on stage. He had discovered many talented musicians in his long career. He had helped launch some of the greatest performers of the modern age. He thought he had seen everything. He had been wrong. This woman, this cleaning lady with the old violin, was something he had never encountered before. Her technique was perfect. Her emotion was raw and real. Her music told a story that went beyond notes on a page. Who was she? Where had she come from? How had such a talent been hidden from the world? These questions raced through his mind as played the final, impossible notes of his masterpiece. Her bow moved one last time. Her fingers pressed down on the final chord. The last note hung in the air like a living thing. Then there was silence. Opened her eyes. She lowered her violin. She was breathing hard. Sweat dripped down her face. Her arms ached. Her fingers burned. But she had done it. After 22 years, she had played again. And she had played perfectly. The auditorium remained silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The judges sat like statues. The staff members in the wings held their breath. The competitors at the door stood frozen. Then slowly, Professor did something he had not done in 15 years of judging auditions. He began to cry. The tears rolled down Professor's cheeks, but he did not wipe them away. He did not seem embarrassed or ashamed. He simply sat there, letting the emotion wash over him like waves on a beach. The other judges did not know what to do. They had never seen their leader cry before. Professor was known for being tough. He was known for his sharp criticism and high standards. Students feared him. Musicians respected him. No one ever saw him show weakness. But this moment was different. Stood on the stage, her violin still in her hands. She was confused by the silence. She had expected them to say something, to tell her she could go, to give some sign of what they were thinking, but they just sat there staring at her. Had she done something wrong? The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Could hear her own heartbeat. She could hear the hum of the stage lights above her. She could hear someone crying softly somewhere in the wings. Finally, Professor spoke. His voice was rough and thick with emotion. "Who are you?" It was not the question had expected. She had expected them to ask what else she could play. She had expected them to ask where she had studied. She had expected normal audition questions. But this question was different. This question was personal. "I am," she said quietly. "I work here, I clean the building." A murmur went through the people watching. The staff members in the wings exchanged shocked glances. They knew. They had worked alongside her for years. They had seen her mopping floors and emptying trash cans. They had passed her in hallways without really looking at her. They had no idea she could play like that. Professor shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "That is what you do. That is not who you are. Someone does not play like that by accident. Someone does not have that kind of technique and emotion without a story behind it. So I ask you again, who are you?" His grip tightened on her violin. The question touched something deep inside her, something she had buried for a very long time, something that hurt to remember. "I was a musician once," she said. "A long time ago in another life." "Where?" "Cuba. I grew up in Havana. I studied at the National Conservatory from the age of 7. The judges exchanged glances. The Cuban Conservatory was famous. It had produced some of the greatest musicians in Latin America. It was not easy to get in. Only the most talented children were accepted. Professor leaned forward. "Go on." Took a deep breath. She had not told this story to anyone in many years. It was locked away in a box inside her heart. But something about this moment, something about standing on this stage with the lights on her face, made her want to open that box. "My grandmother was my first teacher," she said. "She was a violinist too. She came from Spain before I was born. She brought this violin with her," held up the instrument. "She taught me to play before I could read. By the time I was 5, I could play pieces that most adults struggled with." The judges listened in silence. Even the people in the wings had moved closer, straining to hear. "When I was 7, the conservatory heard about me. They tested me and accepted me immediately. For the next 10 years, I did nothing but study and practice. 6 hours a day, sometimes more. The violin was my whole life." Paused. The memories were coming back now, flooding her mind like water through a crack in a dam. "When I was 17, I won a competition in Vienna. It was one of the biggest in the world for young musicians. I was the first Cuban to ever win it. The newspapers wrote about me. People said I would be famous. They said I would play in the greatest concert halls on earth. They said my future was bright." Professor nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand. But something happened. "Yes," his voice grew quieter. "Something happened." She was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. The auditorium was completely still. Everyone was waiting to hear what came next. "My family had problems with the government," continued. "My father spoke out against things he did not agree with. In our country, that was dangerous. We had to leave. We had no choice. We escaped in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on our backs. My grandmother gave me her violin before we left. She said I should take it because she was too old to make the journey. She died 2 months later." A sob came from somewhere in the wings. One of the staff members, a young woman who had worked with for 3 years, was crying into her hands. "We came to this country as refugees. We had nothing. No money, no connections, no one who could help us. My parents did not speak English. My little brothers and sister were scared and confused. Someone had to hold the family together. Someone had to work." Looked down at her violin. "So I put this in a closet and I got a job. I was 18 years old. I cleaned offices at night. I worked in a factory during the day. I sent money home to help my parents. I helped my brothers and sister go to school. I did what I had to do." "And the music?" Professor asked softly. "The music stopped. I had no time, no energy, no chance to practice or perform. Years went by, then more years, then decades. I told myself I would go back to it someday. I told myself I would play again when things got easier, but things never got easier. There was always another bill to pay, always another problem to solve, always another sacrifice to make. Lifted her eyes to meet Professor's gaze. 22 years. That is how long it has been since I played for anyone. 22 years of silence. The judge who had been yawning earlier was now crying openly. She made no effort to hide it. The tears ran down her face and dripped onto the papers in front of her. "Then why tonight?" Professor asked. "Why now?" Thought about this question. She had asked herself the same thing many times over the past week. "I saw the poster for this audition while I was cleaning last week. I stood there looking at it for a long time, and I felt something inside me that I thought had died a long time ago. It was like a voice calling out from deep underwater, a voice that had been trying to reach me for 22 years. She paused. "I went home that night and I opened the closet. I took out my grandmother's violin. I had not touched it in so long that there was dust on the case. But when I opened it, the violin was still beautiful, still perfect, still waiting for me." Ran her fingers along the strings. "I thought I had forgotten how to play. I thought 22 years would have taken everything away. But when I put the bow on the strings, it all came back. My fingers remembered. My heart remembered. The music was still there, inside me, waiting." Professor stood up from his chair. This was unusual. Judges never stood during an audition. They remained seated at their table, maintaining professional distance. But Professor was done being professional. He walked toward the stage, his footsteps echoing in the silent auditorium. He stopped at the edge and looked up at. "Do you know what I have spent my entire life searching for?" he asked. Shook her head. "Musicians are common," he said. "Talented musicians are rare. But what you just showed me is something beyond talent. It is something beyond technique. It is soul, pure and complete. The kind of soul that cannot be taught or learned or bought. The kind of soul that is born inside a person and stays with them forever, even if they try to bury it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. He wiped his eyes without embarrassment. "I have heard thousands of violinists in my career, thousands, and I can count on one hand the ones who moved me the way you just did. Do you understand what I am saying? Do you understand how rare this is?" Felt tears forming in her own eyes now. She had come here tonight expecting nothing, expecting to be dismissed, expecting to be told she was too old, too unimportant, too invisible. She had not expected this. "Ms. Professor said, I do not know why the world lost you for 22 years, but I intend to make sure it does not lose you again." The news spread through the concert hall like fire through dry grass. Within minutes, everyone knew about the cleaning lady who had shocked the judges. Staff members were talking in hallways. Musicians were whispering in the holding room. Someone had already called their friend, who called another friend, who posted something online. The name was suddenly on everyone's lips. Professor had asked to wait in his private office while the remaining auditions continued. He did not want her to leave. He did not want to lose her again. He had called for someone to bring her water and food. He had told his assistant to cancel all his evening appointments. Sat alone in the office, surrounded by photographs and awards and memories that belonged to someone else. The walls were covered with pictures of famous musicians, concert posters from legendary performances, awards made of gold and crystal. Professor had lived an incredible life in the world of music. His life had been very different. She looked down at her grandmother's violin resting in her lap. The wood was warm from her touch. The strings still vibrated softly from her performance. This instrument had traveled so far. From Spain to Cuba to this country, it had survived so much, just like her. Her mind drifted back to the past, to a small apartment in Havana where she had taken her first violin lesson, to her grandmother's gentle hands guiding her fingers, to the smell of rice and beans cooking in the kitchen while music filled every room. Her grandmother's name was Isabella. She had been a concert violinist in Spain before the war changed everything. She had fled her home country with nothing but her talent and her violin. She had built a new life in Cuba, teaching music to children who could not afford fancy schools. Had been her favorite student, her only granddaughter, her hope for the future. "You have a gift," Isabella would say over and over again. "A gift from God, you must never waste it, you must share it with the world." Had believed her. As a child, she had practiced until her fingers bled. She had dreamed of standing on the greatest stages, playing for thousands of people. She had worked harder than anyone else at the conservatory. She had been determined to make her grandmother proud. And she had succeeded, for a little while. The competition in Vienna had been the high point of her young life. She remembered standing on that stage, 17 years old, her whole future spread out before her like a golden road. She remembered the applause that seemed to go on forever. She remembered the judges smiling, nodding, writing down perfect scores. She remembered calling her grandmother afterward, crying with happiness. "I knew it," Isabella had said through the phone, her voice weak but full of joy. "I always knew you would fly." That was one of their last conversations. 2 months later, the family had to leave Cuba, and 3 months after that, Isabella was gone. Wiped a tear from her cheek. Even after all these years, the loss still hurt. She had not been able to say goodbye. She had not been able to hold her grandmother's hand at the end. She had not been able to play one last song for the woman who had given her everything. The door of the office opened, and Professor walked in. He looked tired, but there was a light in his eyes that had not been there before. "The auditions are finished for today," he said, sitting down in the chair across from. "But I could not focus on any of the other musicians. My mind kept coming back to you." Did not know what to say. She was not used to being the center of attention. She was used to being invisible, the quiet woman in the background, the one nobody noticed. "I made some phone calls," Professor continued, "to some friends in the music world, people who keep records of these things." He leaned forward. "Do you know that there is still a file about you, from the Vienna competition, after all these years?" His heart skipped a beat. "There is." "Yes, and the notes in that file are extraordinary. The judges wrote that you were one of the most promising young violinists they had ever seen. They predicted you would become one of the greatest musicians of your generation. They called your playing touched by angels." Felt her throat tighten. She had never seen those notes. She had never known what the judges wrote about her. She had won the competition, and then, just weeks later, her whole life had fallen apart. "People wondered what happened to you," Professor said softly. "The music world was watching. They expected you to appear on stages around the world. They expected to see your name in lights, but you vanished, like a ghost. No one could find any trace of you." "I was surviving," whispered. "I was keeping my family alive." Professor nodded. "I understand, and there is no shame in that. What you did was noble. You sacrificed your dreams so that others could have a chance at theirs. Not many people would be strong enough to make that choice." He paused, looking at her with deep respect. "But I must ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." Waited. "Do you want to play again? Not just once, not just for an audition. I mean really play, perform, share your gift with the world the way your grandmother wanted, the way you were meant to." It was a simple question, but for it felt enormous. For 22 years, she had told herself that part of her life was over. She had buried her dreams so deep that she thought they were dead. She had convinced herself that she was nothing more than a cleaning lady, a survivor, a woman whose best days were behind her. But tonight had changed something. When she stood on that stage and played, she had felt alive in a way she had not felt in decades. The music had flowed through her like blood through veins. Every note had reminded her who she really was, not just the janitor, but the violinist, the musician, the artist. "I am 43 years old," she said slowly. "Most musicians start their careers when they are young. They have their whole lives ahead of them. I have already lived half of mine." Professor smiled. "Do you know how old I was when I conducted my first major orchestra? 51. I spent 30 years teaching in small schools, directing amateur groups, waiting for my chance. Some people thought I was too old. They said I had missed my window, but I did not listen to them. And now I have been conducting for 24 years. He leaned back in his chair. Age is just a number. Talent does not expire. Soul does not fade. What you have inside you is still there. It has been sleeping for a long time, but tonight I watched it wake up. Looked down at her violin again. Her grandmother's violin. The instrument that had traveled across oceans and survived wars and waited patiently in a closet for 22 years. Maybe it had been waiting for this moment. Maybe she had been waiting too. "What would you have me do?" she asked. Professor's smile grew wider. "Tomorrow night this orchestra is performing Ninth Symphony. The concert is sold out. Important people will be there, critics, donors, music lovers from all over the city." Felt her pulse quicken. She knew where this was going. "I want you to be there," Professor said. "Not as a cleaning lady, not as an audience member. I want you on that stage, playing with my orchestra, showing the world what has been hidden for far too long." His hands trembled. "Tomorrow, but that is so soon. I have not practiced properly in years. I have not performed with an orchestra since I was a teenager. I do not have proper clothes or—" Professor held up his hand. "I will handle everything. All you need to do is say yes." Thought about her grandmother, about the promise she had made so many years ago to share her gift with the world, about the dreams that had been stolen from her by circumstances beyond her control. She thought about the young girl in the blue dress who had laughed at her, about all the people who had looked at her and seen nothing but an old cleaning lady. She thought about what it would mean to prove them all wrong. "Yes," she said, "I will do it." Professor stood up and extended his hand, stood and shook it. His grip was warm and firm. "Welcome back to the world of music," he said. "I have a feeling this is only the beginning." The morning sun came through the window of small apartment and fell across her bed. She opened her eyes slowly, wondering for a moment if the previous night had been a dream. But then she saw her grandmother's violin case sitting on the chair beside her, and she knew it was real. Tonight she would perform with the city's most famous orchestra. Sat up in bed, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and terror. Her heart was beating fast. Her hands were already shaking. She had not felt this way since she was a teenager preparing for the Vienna competition. She got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. Her apartment was small and simple. One bedroom, one bathroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that was barely big enough for a couch and a television. The walls were bare except for a single photograph of her grandmother. Stopped in front of the photograph. It had been taken in Spain before the war when Isabella was young and beautiful and full of hope. She was holding her violin, the same one that now owned. She was smiling, as if she knew something wonderful was about to happen. "I wish you could be here tonight," whispered to the photograph. "I wish you could see what is happening." There was no answer, of course, but somehow in that quiet moment felt like her grandmother was listening. The phone rang, breaking the silence, walked over and picked it up. "Good morning, Ms." It was a young woman's voice, professional and cheerful. "This is Lisa from Professor's office. I am calling to confirm your schedule for today." Listened as Lisa explained what would happen. A car would pick her up at noon to take her to the concert hall. She would meet with the orchestra for a rehearsal at 1 o'clock. A stylist would help her choose a dress for the performance. A meal would be provided. Professor wanted her to rest and prepare. It all sounded like something from a movie. Things like this did not happen to people like her. Things like this happened to celebrities and stars, not to cleaning ladies who lived in tiny apartments. "Ms., are you still there?" Realized she had not said anything for several seconds. Yes, I am here, thank you. I will be ready at noon." She hung up the phone and looked around her apartment. In just a few hours, her life was going to change forever. She did not know if she was ready. She did not know if she would ever be ready. But she had said yes, and she was not going to back down now. At exactly noon, a black car pulled up outside her building. The driver held the door open for her like she was someone important, climbed in, clutching her violin case against her chest. The drive to the concert hall took 30 minutes. Watched the city pass by outside the window. She saw people walking on sidewalks, going about their normal days. They had no idea that the woman in the black car was about to do something that would change everything. When they arrived at the concert hall, felt a wave of strange emotions. She had cleaned this building for 12 years. She knew every corner, every hallway, every storage closet. But today, she was not entering through the service entrance in the back. She was walking through the main doors, the ones reserved for performers and VIPs. A young man was waiting for her inside. He introduced himself as Michael, Professor's assistant. He led her through the building, past places she had mopped 1,000 times, to a dressing room that she had cleaned just last week. "This will be your room for today," Michael said, opening the door. "Please make yourself comfortable. The rehearsal will begin in 1 hour." Stepped inside and looked around. The room was beautiful. Fresh flowers sat on a table. A mirror surrounded by lights covered one wall. A rack of elegant dresses stood in the corner. There was food, water, and everything she could possibly need. She sat down in a soft chair and tried to calm her breathing. This is really happening, she told herself. This is not a dream. The door opened and a woman entered. She was tall and elegant, with short gray hair and kind eyes. She introduced herself as Helena, the stylist. "Professor told me about you," Helena said softly. "He said you are remarkable. He said tonight is going to be special." Did not know how to respond. She was not used to compliments. She was not used to being treated this way. Helena walked over to the rack of dresses. "I have selected several options for you. All of them are appropriate for a formal concert, but I want you to feel comfortable. So please, tell me which one speaks to you." Stood up and looked at the dresses. They were all beautiful, silks and satins in deep colors, blues and purples and blacks. Each one looked like it cost more than she made in a month. Then her eyes fell on a dress at the end of the rack. It was deep red, almost the color of wine. It had simple lines and no decoration. It reminded her of something her grandmother might have worn. "That one," she said, pointing. Helena smiled. "I thought you might choose that one. It is perfect." An hour later, stood in the wings of the stage, wearing the red dress and holding her grandmother's violin. She could hear the orchestra warming up beyond the curtain. The sound of dozens of instruments tuning together filled the air. It was a sound she had heard many times before, but always from a distance, always as an outsider looking in. Now she was about to join them. Professor appeared beside her. He was wearing his conducting suit, his white hair neatly combed. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Terrified," admitted. He smiled. "Good. Fear means you care. Fear means this matters to you. The worst musicians are the ones who feel nothing." He put a hand on her shoulder. "The orchestra knows about you now. I told them your story this morning. Some of them cried. They are honored to play with you tonight." Felt tears forming in her eyes. She blinked them back quickly. "One more thing," Professor said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It was old and faded, but recognized it immediately. It was a picture of her, at 17 years old, holding her trophy from the Vienna competition. She was smiling, her whole face lit up with joy and pride. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "I made some calls last night to friends in Vienna. They found it in their archives." He pressed the photograph into her hand. "I want you to remember who you are, not who you became out of necessity, who you truly are deep inside. That girl in the photograph is still alive. She has been waiting for this moment for 22 years. Looked at the picture, at her younger self, at the dreams that had seemed so close back then. "It is time," Professor said, "Are you ready?" Took a deep breath. She thought of her grandmother. She thought of all the sacrifices she had made. She thought of the 22 years of silence. Then she thought of what it would feel like to play again. Really play. Not alone in her apartment, but on a stage with an orchestra for an audience. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." Professor walked out onto the stage. The audience applauded. Could hear him speaking into the microphone, introducing the evening's program. She heard him mention that there would be a special guest tonight, a remarkable musician with a remarkable story. Then she heard her name. "Please welcome." Stepped out of the wings and into the light. The stage was enormous. The audience stretched out before her like a sea of faces, thousands of people all looking at her. For a moment she froze. The fear grabbed her chest and squeezed. She could not move, she could not breathe. Then she felt something warm against her hip, the violin case, her grandmother's violin. She lifted the instrument to her chin. She positioned the bow. She looked out at the audience one more time, and then began to play. The first note cut through the silence like a knife through silk. It was pure and clear and filled with something that words could not describe. The audience, which had been rustling and coughing just seconds before, went completely still, closed her eyes, and let the music take over. She was playing the violin solo from Ninth Symphony. It was a piece she had learned as a teenager, one of the most beautiful passages ever written for violin. She had played it hundreds of times in practice rooms and small recitals, but she had never played it like this. She had never played it with an orchestra behind her and thousands of people listening. Behind her, the orchestra joined in. Strings and winds and brass, all coming together in perfect harmony. The sound swelled and filled the concert hall like water filling a bowl. It rose up to the ceiling and poured down the walls and wrapped around everyone in the audience. In the front row, a woman began to cry. She did not know why. She had come to this concert expecting a pleasant evening of music. She had not expected to feel something this deep in her chest. She had not expected to be moved to tears. Beside her, a businessman who had come only because his wife insisted was leaning forward in his seat. He had been planning to check his phone during the performance. Now he could not look away from the woman on stage. There was something about the way she played, something that made him forget about work and money and all the things that usually filled his mind. Moved through the music like a swimmer through water. Each note came from somewhere deep inside her. She was not just playing. She was telling her story. The story of a little girl who learned to play in a small apartment in Havana. The story of a teenager who won a competition and thought the world was hers. The story of a young woman who gave up everything to save her family. The story of 22 years of silence and waiting and hopping. All of it was in the music, every sacrifice, every tear, every lonely night when she had lain awake, wondering if she had made the right choice. Professor stood at his conductor's podium, guiding the orchestra with small movements of his hands, but he barely needed to do anything. The musicians were playing with everything they had. They had heard story. They understood what this moment meant. They were not just performing a symphony. They were part of something bigger. In the middle section of the piece, there was a passage where the violin played alone, just and her grandmother's instrument, with the whole orchestra falling silent behind her. She played this passage with her eyes open, looking out at the audience. She saw faces she did not know, strangers who had paid money to sit in these seats, people with their own stories, their own struggles, their own hidden dreams. We are all the same, she thought as she played. We all have something inside us that wants to be heard. The music grew softer, more intimate. It was like a conversation between and every person in the room. She was telling them something without words. She was saying, "I see you, I understand, you are not alone." A man in the balcony wiped his eyes. He had lost his wife last year. He had come to this concert because she used to love classical music. He had thought it would make him feel closer to her, but he had not expected to feel like she was actually here, sitting beside him, holding his hand. A teenager in the back row, dragged to the concert by her parents, had put away her phone for the first time all evening. She was listening, really listening. She did not understand classical music. She did not know anything about or violins or orchestras, but she understood emotion, and the emotion pouring from the stage was overwhelming. Reached the climax of her solo. The notes rose higher and higher, reaching toward something beautiful and unreachable. Her fingers flew across the strings. Her bow moved in ways that seemed impossible. The violin sang in her hands like a living thing. Then, at the very peak, she held one long, perfect note. It hung in the air for what seemed like forever. Everyone in the audience held their breath. No one moved. No one made a sound. And then the orchestra came back in, surrounding that single note with a wave of harmony. The music exploded into its final section, every instrument playing at full power, the sound filling every inch of the concert hall. It was triumphant. It was beautiful. It was everything music should be. Played the final notes with tears streaming down her face. She did not try to hide them. She did not care anymore about looking professional or composed. She was feeling everything. 22 years of pain and hope and fear and love, all coming out through her music. The last chord sounded, the last vibration faded, and then there was silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the audience erupted. The applause was like thunder. It rolled through the concert hall, shaking the walls, filling the air. People rose to their feet, one by one, then in groups, then all at once. A standing ovation that seemed to have no end. Stood on the stage, her violin at her side, overwhelmed by the response. She had not expected this. She had hoped to play well. She had hoped not to embarrass herself. But she had not expected thousands of strangers to stand up and cheer for her. Professor walked over to her and took her hand. He lifted it up in the traditional gesture of triumph. The applause grew even louder. "Look at them," he said into her ear, his voice barely audible over the noise. "They are not applauding a performance. They are applauding a resurrection. They are witnessing someone come back to life." Looked out at the sea of standing people. Some of them were crying, some were smiling, some were doing both at the same time. In the front row, she saw the woman who had cried first. The woman was still crying, but now she was also laughing, her face full of joy. In the balcony, she saw the man who had lost his wife. He was standing with his eyes closed, his hands pressed together, as if in prayer. In the back, she saw the teenager who had put away her phone. The girl was staring at with wide eyes, as if she had just discovered something important about the world. The applause went on for 5 minutes, then 10, then 15. People stamped their feet, they called out her name, they refused to stop. Professor finally raised his hand for silence. Slowly, the applause faded. People sat back down in their seats, but they were not the same people who had sat down before the performance. Something had changed inside them. Professor stepped up to the microphone at the front of the stage. "Ladies and," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "what you have just witnessed is not just a concert. It is a miracle. 22 years ago, this woman was told she would be one of the greatest violinists in the world. Then life happened as it does to all of us. She had to make choices, sacrifices. She had to put her dreams aside so that others could dream." He turned to look at, who stood beside him with tears still wet on her cheeks. "But tonight she proved that dreams do not die, they only sleep, and when they wake up they are stronger than ever." The audience began to applaud again, but Professor held up his hand. "I have an announcement to make. As of tonight, is no longer just a guest performer. She has accepted a position as the principal violinist of this orchestra. She will also be teaching master classes at the conservatory, sharing her gift with the next generation of musicians." The applause exploded again, even louder than before. Felt her knees go weak. She had not expected him to announce it like this in front of everyone. She had thought it would be quiet, private, but Professor wanted the world to know. He leaned close to her ear. "Your grandmother would be proud," he whispered. And for the first time in 22 years, believed that was true. The days following the concert were a blur of activity that could barely keep up with. Her phone, which usually received only a few calls a week from her siblings, now rang constantly. Newspapers wanted interviews. Television shows wanted her to appear. Music magazines wanted to tell her story. She had gone to bed as a cleaning lady and woken up as a celebrity. The morning after the concert, sat in her small kitchen, drinking coffee and staring at a newspaper. Her face was on the front page. The headline read, "The cleaning lady who set the stage on fire." She read the article 3 times, unable to believe they were writing about her. There was a knock at her door. When she opened it, she found a delivery man holding the biggest bouquet of flowers she had ever seen. The card attached said, "To, from a grateful audience. You reminded us why music matters." More flowers arrived throughout the day. Then letters. Then emails forwarded by the concert hall. People from all over the city, all over the country, wanted to tell her what her performance had meant to them. A woman wrote, "I watched my mother die last month. I thought I would never feel joy again. Then I heard you play and something inside me healed." A man wrote, "I have been working the same boring job for 20 years, afraid to follow my dreams. After seeing you on that stage, I finally had the courage to quit. I am going back to school to become a teacher, which is what I always wanted." A teenager wrote, "I was going to drop out of violin lessons because I thought I was not good enough. Then I saw you. Now I practice every day. Thank you for showing me what is possible." Read these letters with tears in her eyes. She had not known that music could do this. She had not understood the power of sharing a gift with the world. Professor called that afternoon. "I hope you have been resting," he said, "because the real work is about to begin." "What do you mean?" "The response to your performance has been extraordinary, beyond anything I expected. The orchestra's website crashed from too many visitors. We have received thousands of emails asking when you will perform again. Concert halls in other cities are calling. They want you." Sat down heavily in her chair. This was moving too fast. Just 2 days ago, she had been scrubbing toilets and mopping floors. Now people in other cities wanted to hear her play. "I know this is overwhelming," Professor said gently, "but I want you to understand what is happening here. You are not just a musician who played well at one concert. You are becoming a symbol of hope for everyone who has ever had to give up their dreams. People need to hear your story. They need to see you succeed." "But I am just a normal person," protested. "I am not special. I just did what I had to do to survive." "That is exactly why people connect with you," Professor replied. "You are not some child prodigy who was born into privilege. You are a real person who faced real struggles and kept going anyway. That is what makes your story powerful." There was a pause on the line. "I have more news," Professor continued. "This morning, I received a phone call from Vienna, from the same competition you won 26 years ago." His heart stopped. "Vienna. They want to honor you. They want you to come back and perform at their anniversary concert next month. They are celebrating 50 years of the competition, and they want you to be the featured performer. This is the biggest stage in classical music. This is where careers are made." Could not speak. Vienna, the city where she had won her first major competition, the city where her dreams had begun, the city she had never thought she would see again. "Will you do it?" Professor asked. Thought about her grandmother, about the promise she had made so long ago to share her gift with the world, about all the years she had spent hiding that gift away. "Yes," she said, "I will do it." The next few weeks were the busiest of life. She practiced for hours every day, preparing for Vienna. She met with the orchestra to rehearse. She gave interviews to journalists who wanted to tell her story. She sat for photographs that would appear in magazines around the world. But the most meaningful moments came from unexpected places. One afternoon, she received a visitor at the concert hall. It was the girl in the blue dress, the one who had laughed at during the audition. Her name was Sophie, and she was 18 years old. Sophie stood in the doorway of new dressing room, looking nervous and ashamed. "I wanted to apologize," Sophie said quietly, "for how I treated you at the audition. I was wrong. I judged you without knowing anything about you. I thought I knew what a real musician looked like, but I was wrong." Smiled and gestured for Sophie to sit down. "You were not wrong to be surprised. I did not look like the other musicians. I understand why you thought what you thought." "But that is no excuse," Sophie insisted. "I have been thinking about what you said on that stage, about giving up your dreams to help your family. I have never had to sacrifice anything. My parents pay for everything. I have had private lessons since I was 4 years old. I never knew what it was like to struggle." She paused, looking down at her hands. "After I heard you play, I realized that I have been playing the violin for all the wrong reasons. I was doing it to impress people, to win competitions, to make my parents proud, but I was not playing because I loved it, not the way you love it." Leaned forward, "And now? Now I want to learn to play like you, with real feeling, with soul." Sophie looked up, her eyes hopeful. Would you consider teaching me?" Felt something warm spread through her chest. This was what Professor had meant about sharing her gift. It was not just about performing on stages. It was about passing on what she knew to the next generation. "Yes," said, "I would be honored to teach you." Sophie's face lit up with joy. She stood up and hugged tightly, not caring about proper behavior or professional distance. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." That evening, went to Professor's office to discuss her schedule. When she arrived, she found him in deep conversation with a woman she did not recognize. The woman was tall and elegant, with silver hair and sharp eyes. She was wearing a suit that probably cost more than used to make in a year. "Ah," Professor said, standing up. "Please come in, I want you to meet someone." The woman extended her hand. I am the director of the International Music Foundation." Shook her hand, not sure what this meant. "Ms. has a proposal for you," Professor said, barely able to contain his excitement. Smiled. "Ms., I have been watching what has happened since your concert. The response has been extraordinary, but what interests me most is not your talent. Talent is common. What interests me is your story." She sat down and gestured for to do the same. "The foundation I run supports music education for underprivileged children. We believe that every child, regardless of background, deserves the chance to learn music. We have programs in schools across the country, but we have been looking for someone who could represent our mission, someone who could inspire people, someone who could show the world what is possible when talent meets opportunity." Leaned forward, her eyes locked on. "I want you to be the face of our foundation. I want you to travel to schools and perform for children who have never seen a live concert. I want you to share your story with young people who think their dreams are impossible. I want you to show them that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be." Felt tears forming in her eyes. This was bigger than anything she had imagined. This was not just about her anymore. This was about helping others. "What do you say?" Ms. asked. "Will you help us change lives?" Thought about all the children out there who were like her. Children with gifts they could not develop. Children who had to sacrifice their dreams for their families. Children who had been told they would never amount to anything. She thought about what it would mean to reach them, to show them that their stories were not over, to give them hope. "Yes," said, "I will do it. I will do all of it." Professor clapped his hands together with joy, smiled with satisfaction, and sat in her chair, overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in just a few short weeks. She had been invisible for 22 years. Now she was about to become a voice for the voiceless. Her grandmother, she knew, would have been so proud. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything. stood backstage at the same concert hall where she had once cleaned floors and emptied trash cans. But tonight was different. Tonight was special in ways she still could not fully believe. The auditorium was sold out. Every seat was filled. People had traveled from other cities, other countries, just to see her perform. Television cameras were set up in the back to broadcast the concert around the world. The pressure should have been crushing, but felt strangely calm. She looked down at her grandmother's violin, the wood glowing softly in the backstage light. This instrument had been with her through everything, through triumph and loss, through silence and song, through all the dark years when she thought she would never play again. 5 minutes, Ms. Nodded at the stagehand and continued her preparations. She was wearing a beautiful red dress, similar to the one from her first concert. Her hair was done simply but elegantly. She looked like a professional musician, because that was what she was now. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of activity. She had performed in Vienna to a standing ovation that lasted 20 minutes. She had appeared on television shows and magazine covers. She had become the face of the International Music Foundation, traveling to schools across the country to perform for children who had never seen a live concert. But tonight was different from all of those events. Tonight, her mother was in the audience. Her mother was 81 years old. She lived in a small apartment on the other side of the city with younger sister Maria. She had not seen perform since before they left Cuba more than 26 years ago. Her health was fragile. She rarely left the house. But when had called to tell her about tonight's concert, had insisted on coming. "I have waited a lifetime to see you play again," had said, her voice thin but determined. "Nothing will keep me away." So Maria had arranged everything. A special wheelchair, a medical attendant, the best seats in the front row. Tonight would finally see her daughter perform in the country that had become their home. Felt her eyes grow wet at the thought. She blinked quickly and took a deep breath. She could not cry now, not before the performance. 2 minutes, Ms. She picked up her violin and walked toward the stage entrance. Through the curtain, she could hear the murmur of the audience. Thousands of people waiting to hear her play. It still amazed her that this was her life now. Professor appeared beside her. He had become like a father to her over the past months, a mentor, a friend. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. "I think so." "Your mother is in the front row. Maria is with her. They look very proud." Felt her heart swell. "I know, I saw them earlier." Professor put his hand on her shoulder. "Tonight is special, not because of the cameras or the fame or any of that. Tonight is special because you are completing a circle that began a very long time ago. Your grandmother gave you a gift. Tonight, you are sharing that gift with the world, exactly as she always wanted." Nodded, unable to speak. "It is time," Professor said. The stage manager opened the curtain and walked out into the light. The applause began immediately. Thousands of people rising to their feet before she had even played a single note. They clapped and cheered and called her name. The sound washed over her like a wave. Walked to the center of the stage and looked out at the audience. She found her mother immediately in the front row, was sitting in her wheelchair, tears already streaming down her wrinkled face. Maria stood beside her, one hand on her mother's shoulder. Lifted her bow in a small salute to her mother, raised one trembling hand in response. Then turned to face the full audience. The applause slowly faded. Silence fell over the concert hall. Thousands of people held their breath, waiting. Lifted her violin and began to play. The piece she had chosen for tonight was special. It was a Cuban song, one that her grandmother had taught her when she was just 5 years old. It was simple, beautiful, full of memories of a homeland she barely remembered and a grandmother she would never forget. The notes floated through the concert hall, soft and gentle at first. They told the story of a little girl and an old woman, sitting together in a small apartment, sharing a love of music. They told the story of sacrifice and loss and hope that refuses to die. Closed her eyes and listened. She remembered sitting in that same apartment, watching her mother teach her granddaughter. She remembered the way Little's face had lit up when she finally mastered a difficult passage. She remembered the dreams they had all shared before life became hard and complicated. The music grew stronger, more powerful, played with everything she had. Every note was filled with love. Love for her grandmother, love for her mother, love for the gift she had been given and the chance to share it. In the audience, people were crying openly. They did not know the song. They did not know its history, but they could feel the emotion. They could sense that they were witnessing something profound. Reached the final phrase of the song. Her bow slowed. The notes hung in the air like stars. Then, with one last gentle stroke, she finished. Silence held the room for a long moment. Then did something unexpected. She pulled herself up from her wheelchair, using every bit of strength her old body had. Maria tried to help her but waved her away. She stood on her own 2 feet, trembling but determined. And she began to clap. Alone at first, just one old woman standing in the front row applauding her daughter. Then the people beside her joined in. Then the row behind them. Then the entire auditorium. The standing ovation rolled through the concert hall like thunder. People cheered and stamped their feet and called her name, but barely heard them. Her eyes were fixed on her mother, still standing despite her weak legs, still clapping despite her tired hands. Set down her violin and walked to the edge of the stage. Without thinking, she stepped down and crossed the few feet to where her mother stood. She took hands in her own and looked into her eyes. "Mama," she whispered. "My beautiful girl," whispered back, her voice cracking. "My talented, strong, beautiful girl, your grandmother is watching, I know she is, and she is so proud of you." Wrapped her arms around her mother and held her tightly. The audience continued to applaud, but the sound seemed far away. In this moment, there was only and the love that had survived everything life had thrown at them. After a long moment, helped her mother back into the wheelchair. She kissed her forehead and then turned back to the stage. The audience was still standing, still clapping. They had witnessed something beautiful, and they did not want it to end. Climbed back onto the stage and faced the crowd. She was crying now, but she did not try to hide it. These were not tears of sadness. They were tears of joy, tears of completion, tears of a dream finally coming true. As she stood there, bathed in light and love, noticed something in the back of the auditorium. A door, slightly open, and through that door she could see a face, a familiar face. It was a woman in a cleaning uniform, watching from the shadows. She looked to be about 40 years old. She had tired eyes and rough hands, and the look of someone who spent her nights working while others slept. Recognized that look. She had worn it herself for 12 years. Without thinking, raised her bow in a small salute to the woman in the back. The woman seemed surprised at first. Then slowly, she smiled. Smiled back. She did not know that woman's story. She did not know what dreams she had given up or what struggles she had faced. But she knew that every person in this world carried something precious inside them. A gift, a talent, a hope that refused to die. Sometimes those gifts got buried. Sometimes life got in the way. Sometimes people had to wait 22 years for their moment to come. But the moment always came. For those who kept believing. For those who refused to give up. For those who understood that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be. Lifted her violin one more time. She began to play again, a new piece, one full of hope and promise. The music filled the concert hall and poured out into the night. And somewhere, in a place beyond the world we can see, an old woman named Isabella smiled and closed her eyes and listened to her granddaughter play. The gift had been passed on, the circle was complete, and the music would never ever stop.